Welcome to another episode of Sim Sundays. This is episode 37, and well, I just checked the length of time that Mr. Tom over here was speaking to our guest this time, and it's a very long one. So, in this one, we're actually going to split it up into two parts. So this is 37.1. Tom, this is a long one. How did you make it so long? What happened?
This was honestly a fantastic podcast. Like this is a really, really interesting one. This has got a bit of everything. This is a bit of everything that I ever wanted the podcast to be, because we really went deep into like Nevil's story, like how he got to be the CEO of Vesaro, like how he went from like zero to providing like hundreds and hundreds of very bespoke sim rigs to the F1 arcade, like the partnership with D-Box and how they integrate motion, like how he went from a world of software into hardware. So anyway, we got really into the chat, and I just didn't want it to end. And I sat there, and I had 2 trains to London that were booked. I missed the first one, and I was like, well, I'm going to keep going because this is so good. And then I missed the second one, and I was like, I don't want to cut this short because it was such an interesting chat. So I kind of, as I sat there, I was like, okay, this is going to be a 2-part. Let's settle into this. This is really, really interesting. So the first episode that we're going to hear is really about Nevil and his background. And I think, Chris, you're going to really enjoy this one, because obviously, sadly, you weren't at the episode and you haven't listened to it yet. But you're going to really enjoy it. This guy is like a pioneer, like a genuine pioneer. Like he's like in a book about like most influential people to develop the internet, which is very cool. And then we talk about like his methodology and his ethos around design and development, and it's fascinating. He's such an interesting person.
Very cool. Well, I hope you all enjoy this conversation as much as Tom did while he got to speak to Nevil. And yeah, we'll see you on the other side.
Nevil, hi. Welcome to the Sim Sundays podcast. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No, anytime. We've spoken before a couple of times. We met at the expo last year, just gone, and you showed us around the Vesaro rigs you had and the new V-Rigs, and we'll get onto those. But I do remember us having a little chat just outside your enormous booth at the expo. And you said that you get quite nervous when you do interviews, and you said you weren't too comfortable on camera and doing interviews. Why do you think that is?
I wouldn't say I get nervous. It's I used to get nervous, and when I spoke to you at Sim Expo, it had been a couple of years because we had the pandemic, so I was just a bit out of touch with it. But I did my first interview at the age of 21, so 24 years ago now. Not really interview. I did my first public appearance on a stage in front of about 4,500 people.
Oh my God.
Yeah, at the age of 21. So that was in my web design days. I was quite a well-known Flash web designer, and I'd been invited to speak at Computer Arts London as a guest speaker. And I'd only started my own business sort of 3 months earlier, and the next thing I was on stage talking about the industry, and it was a very, very nervous experience. And I kind of avoided those kind of public speakings for a while. And then, many years later, I started Vesaro, and I had to do public speakings, especially at events. And, as soon as people knew I was there, they wanted to speak to me. Sometimes I speak to them. Sometimes I just avoid them because it was stressful enough at an event, let alone being on camera. But I've kind of got used to it over the years, and, event after event, I've got quite comfortable with it, and sometimes I actually quite enjoy it. So, but yeah, when I spoke to you last, it had been a long gap of at least 2 years of hiding in our holes with the pandemic, and now by the end of the expo, I was actually having quite a lot of fun. I did an interview with D-Box, and I quite enjoyed it. So I'm quite excited to be here and happy to have a good chat with you about whatever's coming, which I have no idea because I have no questions in advance.
You made that sound very ominous.
Well, this is completely unprepared, which is actually how I prefer it. I'd rather I don't like preparing for interviews. I actually was on Discovery Channel once. Tech Toys 360 came and did a expose or whatever you like on our company, and they sent me a set of preset questions the night before.
Oh no!
We were going live on TV, and
you must have felt like you had to revise them.
Yeah, and I did. I kind of prepared these answers, and when I started to, as they sat me down, full film crew, and I started to try and respond to the answers, and it just wasn't working. And so the crew said, "Look, just respond naturally off the cuff." So I was like, "Okay, cool," and that's all I needed to do, and it was easy after that. Because ultimately, if they're asking me questions about my business and and aspects of the industry, if I know the answer, then I don't have to have it prepared and written down, because then that's an acting role, and I'm definitely no actor.
No.
and I'm no good at remembering lines. So it's I'd rather just be off the cuff. And
100%. And I feel like if you get asked for interviews or comments about Vesaro or sim racing, or in this case, like yourself, you kind of know what you're talking about by default, right? So there's no like nerves about, they can ask me something I don't know the answer to. Because if somebody asks you a question in an interview that you didn't know the answer to, it's probably a pretty poor question.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not an interview for a job.
Yeah, sometimes people ask, so they're like, okay, well, you're in the sim industry, so you must know everything about the sim industry, or you must know everything about Formula One and every type of race series. So when someone asks me a question about the industries that I'm in, I'm not going to know every answer. But like you said, if it's a question about me or my business, or things that I clearly specialize in, then I should have a decent enough response. Well, I'll try my best for you, Tom.
Well, it's just as well, because I think that's where I want to start, because you said something there which I thought was particularly interesting, which you said you were a well-known Flash designer. Now, I'm not a technical guy, but I do remember at school, like, people playing with Flash. I remember when Flash came out and it was in all the like computer rooms, which I guess nowadays people would just call rooms. I'm imagining that like pretty much every room in a school now has computers in it. But I remember people like designing all these like videos that you could do on Flash, or like 3D animations. So how did you get into that?
So I studied, I did 3 different degrees at university. I kept changing, the old story of you go to university at 17 years old, do you really know what you want? I eventually found the course, and I was studying software systems for the arts and media. So we did like 3D animation, 3D modeling, music production, web. If it barely existed back then, it was text and images, like really basic. And I specialize in 3D, and I wanted to become a 3D game designer and eventually work in film special effects. That was kind of my path. That's where I wanted to go. And I remember the day I'd actually gone for a job interview for a games company, and it was going to be developing an Olympics game. So, like Olympic sport game. And so this would be 23 years ago. And I didn't get the job, and I was sat at home a little bit miserable and surfing the web, and this website came up that had animation and sound, and I was like, whoa, what the hell is this? This is not what, I mean, this might sound a bit crazy to some of your sort of younger listeners, but yeah, the web was text
static
and pictures, and it loaded at a painful pace. And then all of a sudden there was this like amazing page. I was like, I've got to know how to do this. This is incredible. And back then you didn't really have, YouTube didn't exist. There was no real online resources to kind of learn this stuff. And I just sort of painfully sort of struggled with trying to learn how to do it. And that was it. I was obsessed with this new technology that could create these amazing mixed media mediums, and started developing websites. And before I knew it, I was running my own business straight out of university and built the website for Guinness World Records. And
that's very cool.
Yeah, we built a website that kind of had never been done before. We managed to get the entire Guinness World Records catalog into a website that had a sub 10-second loading time on 56k modems, which kind of it was a real challenge. And and it got me a lot of notoriety and, you know, in magazines and stuff like that. And it just kind of went from there. I became very well known as a Flash designer. They used to call me one of the pioneers of Flash. So, which I was in a book recently, which was quite cool. That actually came out. It was the sort of history and foundation of web design, and it was all the people that were sort of key to making the web what it is today.
That's very
so
cool.
It was quite interesting to sort of have this book come out sort of recently of an old life of mine. It was a nice way to kind of to recognize that old life and those old achievements from a long time ago, because Vesaro has kind of consumed my life, almost like a new version of me in the past 11 years. So yeah, it was an amazing time. We were really kind of pioneers of what we were doing, and really felt like we were creating something new. I guess, like, you know, people who are the pioneers of AI recently, and you know, the people who were pioneers of crypto, those guys in those early days that were like, "Whoa, we're onto something exciting here," and that's kind of where we were back in the day. It was a good time, and part of the story that kind of led to Vesaro in many ways. So
yeah, I was just thinking that it's interesting because it does feel like back then, so this was in the year 2000, Flash would have been at the very forefront of development. So you would have been doing things that people literally hadn't done before. So you'd have been trialing new techniques. And I kind of feel like when you look at Vesaro and you look at V-Rig and you look at Valkyrie, and we'll get onto all three of those, it definitely feels like you're starting from a pretty, like a blank piece of paper each time. Is that kind of what excites you when you get out of bed? Is it the ability to create new?
Absolutely. And that's what I loved about. So we didn't just do websites. In my last company was called Theory 7. We did websites, 3D modeling, animation, and sort of motion graphics, and sort of merging all that together, and also having that online. And each time you did a new project, it was like, in a way, like starting a little mini business. So it was always something new. You were creating a new product, and that definitely excited me, which is why I did it for a long time. And with Vesaro, it's you know, you're creating, when you create new products, there's always something new. It's hard to get bored, because if you were bored one day, actually that's a great opportunity, because in that moment of boredom is when everything else has cleared out and you're ready to fill that bored space with an idea and a concept, and which can lead to a design and a new product or new, you know, direction for the company. So yeah, I mean, definitely when I create new things, it's a blank sheet, but it's definitely not starting with an empty pot, so to speak, because I every time I start a new idea, a new concept, a new business, it's taking this bucket that I've got filled with ideas, skills, failures, successes, and I take all of those pieces and I put them on the sheet of paper. So I'm always coming to the table with an arsenal, really, never an empty pot, so to speak.
Yeah, so it's like the application of your previous experiences, but in you know, applying that in a novel way, in a new way, to a new concept, or in Vesaro's case, presumably to a new client with bespoke, unique needs, right? So, you know, it looks like your product line is very much designed to be bespoke, depending on a client's wishes. And you know, if you take F1 Arcade, for example, like that must have been like one of the most exciting briefs to come across your desk, to be like, okay, how do we build new into this? How do we not make it exactly what they were expecting in their heads?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, F1 Arcade was really we've done a lot of things that were really pushing the boundaries hard for us, because the expectations have just been beyond anything we've done before. We're not just building a simulator that you would put in your average sim center. We've built a simulator that's got to handle the abuse of thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah.
You know, it's a 7-day week operation, you know, running 12 hours plus a day. Something that can handle it's an environment that's quite brutal. It's mass market. The rigs are unmanaged, so which is not really something you see. So we've basically built something that performs like an arcade machine, but with an arcade machine, they tend to They make them very dumbed down,
Mm-hmm.
really simple wheel, really simple controls. Like everything is dumbed down because it's got to be able to survive abuse. We've gone, right, well, we're going to take a professional training simulator and we're going to make it work in an arcade environment with with no, you don't have anyone to get you in and out of the simulator. It's kind of free play, like a when I say free play, you book your session, but it's, you don't have someone to help you in and out. It's not a managed experience. So that was a massive challenge, being able to handle being in an environment with drink and food, and then be able to develop a product that can then go global and be fully certified. It's a fully, it's got full certification. We're currently expanding to America, where we'll be getting a UL certification, which is probably the most stringent, hardest form of testing possible. We're sending a simulator to a laboratory in California where it'll undergo up to 2 months of testing in multiple laboratories. So we'll have
those testers have got an incredible job. Imagine being one of these testers and you just get this free, like, right, we've got this racing simulator. We just want you to use it for the next 2 months and see if it. I'm sure there's more to it than that. But like, what a great thing to get to test.
I mean, there was talk. Yeah, I mean, there was talk at one point of things being set on fire as part of a test. Luckily, it seems like that's not going to have to happen. But when we had
harsh.
Yeah, when we had that for the first time, we kind of it was a bit like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty extreme, and the level of detail is everything down to the connector on the end of a cable, the material of the cable, the type of plastic that's used in in the parts that we're making. Everything has to be fully certified, like UL certified, on the machine, in order to gain a full certification of the entire product, which is something that a lot of products don't have in this kind of space. So
it feels like you've got an incredibly detailed knowledge of kind of hardware and manufacturing and compliance, and you've kind of had to develop this with Vesaro. But I want to kind of go back a little bit because you worked at Blue Marble, and then it was Theory 7, which are obviously digital software development, animation, etc. And that seemed to be you said yourself that you were kind of pivotal in developing new processes for web development and the internet and whatnot. So given how kind of deeply integrated into that kind of software world you were, why did you make this huge leap from software to hardware?
Yep. So exactly. I mean, there was a point where I was developing my own Flash games, so coding in ActionScript, and I built a really cool game with a jet fighter, and you'd fire rockets, and the rockets would actually lock on to targets, and things That's like cool. That. Really good fun. Like a top-down shooter, and obviously we were developing pretty complex. We built forums in Flash and chat bots and all sorts of pretty complex stuff. So yes, software and software development is something that I'd done for a long time. I was always much more of a designer. That's what really excited me, like more visual and design. But development was a part of what I did, and I had a team. I had a team of developers as well that worked with me. But after like 11 years of that company, I started to realize that everything I did kind of disappeared onto a hard drive somewhere. And it's a little bit like how people talk about, we all take pictures on our phones these days and it never really exists. It just kind of disappears onto your phone.
Very rarely look at them.
Yeah, and everyone's like started talking these days about, we should print our pictures off and go back to those old days where you the first thing you did when you got back from holiday was you took your camera, took your rolls to the lab and Boots or something, and they would process your film and give you a packet of pictures, and you'd sift through your pictures, something that people, some people won't even know what I'm talking about. And people now are talking about wanting to print stuff off again. And this is what was kind of happening with me. Like, we had these projects, they existed on a computer, they went live on a computer generally, big campaigns. We did a lot of projects for Hewlett Packard, did about 25 projects over the years. And, they'd have these big campaigns and then they'd sort of disappear. And I got to the point where I was like, two things happened that led to it. One was I wanted to move to the next step up the ladder. All my clients built things, they built products, and they sold to consumers. Hewlett Packard, Ford, Microsoft. Like, these were some of my clients, and that was the next natural step up the ladder, was to move to creating products for consumers. And the next thing I wanted to do was, I had this weird desire to build something that would rust and would someday would just live forever in the future. In 100 years from now, one of our products would still be there, kind of rusting away physically as a physical thing.
Where did that come from? that something must have triggered that. Why did you want that to be the case?
It was, like I said, it was that thing of everything just existing on hard drives and being, you can't even see it. You can't even look back on it without loading up a computer and sort of looking at it on your computer. And there was this strange thing of I wanted to take, and I did 3D. We built things in 3D. We 3D modeled things. We created loads of cars and all sorts of different, built 3D computers and for Hewlett Packard and servers. And I wanted to take those designs and pull them out of the screen and have them in my room and be able to walk around it and touch it and feel it. In 3D, you apply textures. You apply a texture to something, or a paint finish. You set up lights and cameras, and maybe I did a lot of photography over the years, and maybe that also made me want to do things for real. I wanted to take my design and pull it out of the computer and have it as a physical object that I could light. I could light with real lights and film and photograph with a camera, and we could choose the texture for real, and that would be a paint finish, and it would have a certain feel to it.
So do things feel more real to you if they are physical then? So if you build,
they definitely do now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
After years of, I guess this also goes back to there was this point at university where I was looking for a new course at university, and I found this course called Model Design. It was a really cool course it was like film special effects model making. So you would build like big spaceships that would go, for big Hollywood budget films. We went to the set of Lost in Space, for example, and I had a kind of a pivotal moment on the set of Lost in Space, and we were walking around visiting all the model designers, and there was these model designers in the corner of this room building this giant space model that was going to be part of a panning shot. And they were in the corner of this room gluing and sticking stuff together, and that's really cool. It's really cool. Okay. And then they took us on the tour. They took us to the CGI department, which was quite a new thing at the time. And it was indoors, and they had their music playing. They had a pile of CDs, and they were eating a nice chocolate muffin, and they were like sitting on their comfy chairs. They weren't in the corner of a warehouse, and they had their fancy computers. And I saw what they were doing, and they were doing exactly the same thing as the model makers, but they were doing the CGI shots of the spaceship. So, back then, a lot of it was, you'd have some 3D model, you'd have some models and some CGI, and they would kind of mix it. And I just thought, that's the future, like building on a computer. That's where it's going to go. And I pivoted the next year to a new course that had 3D modeling and animation as part of that course. So I actually started off very much in the physical world. I did a lot of design. I did design technology A level and sort of specialize in building physical objects. And my university degree, my middle degree was very based around physical objects and building physical models. And then I pivoted into the digital space, which now nothing exists other than what's behind your screen. And that was the end of my sort of my path of physical, because I was really getting on board with what the future was, and the future was digital in that realm. Now, obviously, when you come to a simulator, it can't exist virtually, unless you're just using a pure VR headset
Yeah.
and some controllers. But that's not a racing experience. It has to be a physical experience. And this, sort of discovering, my reasons for starting Vesaro is a whole nother sort of set of parameters. But part of the desire to actually start a company like that and to build something completely physical was very much because of that journey where I started off in a physical space. I went digital, and I definitely wanted to move into a physical space again in terms of building real products.
Do you think there's an element here of there's more art involved in the physical products than there are in the computer generated products? Like, I was having a conversation. In fact, it wasn't a conversation. I was basically schooled. So I've started a lunchtime project where I'm doing the McLaren F1 Lego set. And I was building this thing, and I was like, "Oh, this is so beautiful! It's like millimeter perfect. Every single like little piece is perfectly designed to fit together, and it's such a satisfying experience." And I said to Nicola and Camille in the office, I was like, "Imagine being the guys that design this. Like, you can just tell when you're putting this together. This has been put together with so much passion. Like, these are guys who absolutely love what they do every day." And they turn around and are like, "Tom, it's all done by computer. Like, there's no one like in a lab coat that's like studying old sketches of Formula One. Like, it's 90% of it is done on a computer." And I thought, has that kind of like ruined the illusion for me a little bit that I'm essentially just kind of almost deconstructing a computerized process here? Like, it's got like in reverse.
No, I don't think so. Like, yes, it might be 90% design on computer, but every element of that design results in a physical experience. When you're putting Lego together, it's a physical tactile experience where you can feel every click and the way it goes together and the texture of the plastic. You can hold it and move around it and see it, with the vision that we have, which is far superior than what we can see on a computer screen or a VR experience. So yeah, the design may be on a computer, but it's a completely physical design that you're building, unless that design never makes it off the computer and it's a failed product, which happens.
But do you think there's more art in the physical items than there are in the kind of the process of it being built on the computer? And the reason I'm asking this is because I'm wondering if this is why perhaps you've gone back to hardware over software, because it feels like you had your love of this space has come from the art. So that the animation, there's a bit of art there, but you spoke really fondly of the guys in the corner of the factory building the set. Is there just a bit more love for that side of art?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's a greater form of art. If you build on a computer, and I've done everything from 2D animation and graphics in Photoshop to 3D, which is just kind of the next step up, doing 3D modeling and animation where something, you can see it in a 3D form and make it move, and taking the next step up from that is a 3D object that now exists in the physical world that you've got to take through various stages of manufacturing to create it, to paint it and give it a finish and a feel and make it a product that you can interact with and has a purpose. So it's a sort of an extreme form of art. Like, building a product really is one of the hardest things. Building a product that is functional and serves a purpose and looks great is, I would say, that the highest form of art possible. And I think anyone would, you could, I think, an iPhone will be put in a gallery quite happily, and people would say that was a piece of art that millions of people got to enjoy. And the same with any successful product.
And I suppose, I suppose the thing with the simulator as well is that it's not just a physical object which you can hold, and you're saying that you can look at it from different angles and you feel the textures. You're literally inside it. Like, you're I'm sat in this rig now, and you can feel it. If I was driving, then like nearly every part of your body is interacting with the simulator in some way, whether it's your hands on the wheel or it's your feet on the pedals or sitting in the seat and then looking at the way that the screen wraps around. Like, there's so much to think about. There's so much ergonomics that are involved in designing a sim. But I want to know the like the practicalities, right, of this. So you've gone from software to hardware. You've gone from Theory 7 to Vesaro. Now, your LinkedIn profile would claim that you finished Theory 7 in December 2011 and you started Vesaro the same month, 2011. Now,
yep.
what was the case here? Like, how did this actually happen? Like, at what point did you make the plunge? I'm always really interested in these founder stories. Like, was it very much the case that you were like, right, I'm going to start Vesaro. It's going to be a 10-year project. I'm going to start with this, and then we're going to go to this, and then or like, was it an experiment? Just like, tell me how it happened.
I wish I was that organized in the future planning. So Vesaro, obviously we had the recession, and that was, really hard hitting on everybody. I kind of felt like I'd got away with it at first. We were sort of a year into the recession and we were still super busy. But eventually, like everybody, it kind of caught up with us and our work reduced. We were in a position with Theory 7 that we got to choose all these really cool, fun projects. It was the extra campaign that the company would do. It wasn't the standard websites. We kind of avoided that. We didn't do e-commerce sites and stuff. We did the really cool campaigns. And we just come off the back of doing a project for Ford. It was actually Microsoft and Ford, and Microsoft built the website and they built like the back end part, and then we built Ford City. So we 3D modeled this entire city. It had like 200 buildings in it. We modeled from scratch, 3,000 trees and all these different areas. We filmed fashion models on green screen and had them kind of walking in this 3D city, and you could fly around the city and go to different areas, and it would, it was a sort of 3D interactive website. Really, really amazing project.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It was epic. We had our own render farm in house. We were 3D rendering all the animation. I had about 20 people working for me at the time, mainly remotely. We were kind of a primarily remote networking company, but I had a core team as well. And this project was going on. It was like super fun. We had loads of other projects lined up, Coca-Cola Happiness Factory, PC World, and all these projects were kind of, and then the news hit. The Lehman Brothers, I think, was the bank. Lehman Brothers went down, and then all of a sudden the whole stack of cards just came tumbling down. It really started to, started to hit the fan, so to speak, and things started to change. But it was an amazing moment, really. And although the recession was awful for a lot of people and it affected us seriously, but what it did do was it gave me time to kind of look up from my computer, because the work had kind of, plateaued off with the recession. A lot of these super fun projects were getting pulled. The big brands were just sticking to their standard websites and holding off on the fun sort of extra campaigns. We were really big into digital magazines as well, so we were doing loads of digital online magazines at the time. We did like Honda Dream Online magazine like every month as an example, and for a lot of companies they were great for sort of eco credentials to be having a digital online magazine and moving in that direction. But all of a sudden now you've got the recession, so being eco is like, forget that, we've got to batten down the hashes. So the online digital magazines were definitely sort of put on hold for quite a long time. But it gave me a great opportunity, which was to have headspace. And headspace is a really powerful thing, because you can do great things with when you've got space in your head. The last time I probably had that was as a kid. When you're sitting on the couch looking out at your back garden, bored out of your skull. And boredom is a really powerful thing, because it's in boredom that you can be creative. And I think being bored is a really important thing to try, and if you can get bored moments in your life, that's where things can happen. It's hard for it to happen when you're super busy with whatever it is you're doing. So it gave me this opportunity to look up from my computer and look at what was going on, and to put my mind into a receiving position where I was able to receive ideas and able to look at other ideas other than the sort of space I was in. And it was actually it was a guy who'd worked for me, a 3D modeler, very talented. And after he'd sort of gone back to England, he based himself here for a project. He sent me this little video of a kind of a rig that he'd mocked up, like a 3D animation of this rig, and it was very boxy looking, kind of how rigs ended up looking 10 years later with everyone doing the aluminium profile design. He'd kind of done that, long. So this 3D modeler has shown me this 3D animation he'd done of this rig. I think it was like Rocksteady Rigs or something, and I just looked at it, and in that moment, because my mind was kind of open and free, I looked at it and thought, I could do better than that. And that's this sort of weird entrepreneur personality that I and many other sort of entrepreneurs have, is you look at things and you think, I could do better than that. Or you have novel ideas. There's two sort of pathways. One is you see existing ideas or industries and you think, how could I improve that or do better? Or you very much like Steve Jobs, he didn't invent the phone, but he did it better. And so I had that moment of, I could do better than that. And it kind of, in that one moment, that was it. It kind of started from there. There was a lot of things that made my mind in that moment, dive into that. And that was, I was really into cars, performance cars, sort of casual sort of racing. And I was never a professional racing driver, but I was obsessed with gaming and gadgets and computers and building computers and all of these things, but they were all very much in my personal domain. And so all of a sudden there was this opportunity to kind of take all of those personal things, combine them with what I'd been doing the past 11 plus years with building things, 3D modeling and design and programming, etc., and all of a sudden be able to combine these two things, my sort of personal loves with all of my professional industry experience, not in the sim world at that point, and sort of dive head deep into this new world of creating a physical product. So I really have thought over the years I'd like to sort of track that guy down and sort of thank him for sort of giving me that little spark moment,
that little competitive nudge, I think.
Yeah, like, I mean, I don't think anything ever came of it on his end, but I think maybe I would have got there another way. Maybe I would have seen a simulator or come across one, and the idea to go in would have happened a month later, a year later. I don't know, but that was the moment that it really happened, and from there it was a case of starting to design the product. I had to learn about manufacturing, and although I'd done part of one of my degrees was manufacturing technology, it wasn't enough to do what was really needed to actually build a product. There was a huge amount to learn. I did have a partner back in the early days for about 6 to 7 months who was a CAD designer, which helped accelerate that initial period. And it's kind of, the rest was history really. From then on, I just sort of went headfirst into it and put everything on the line and started Vesaro. There's obviously a lot more to it, but
yeah, of course. And what was the thesis? What were you going for? Because you'd seen what sounds to me like an aluminium profile rig, which obviously you've got a lot of companies doing that sort of thing. And it's interesting, Ellie, you said that Steve Jobs didn't invent the phone; he just improved on it. But when you look at the Vesaro range, it's almost the opposite. In that there's the old phrase that 100 years ago, if you'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, not a car. It feels like you're almost kind of getting into that realm with what you're building at Vesaro. You're not going for just a better aluminium profile rig. Like you're building things with a completely fresh perspective that look, your product looks so different to anybody else's. What was the thesis behind Vesaro right at the beginning? Like what was it that you thought that you could do that people weren't doing at the time?
Well, I think the approach I always take is I never look at what everyone else is doing and try and copy or do an improved copy of that. That's not really what I'm about as a person. We always design, sometimes actually to our detriment, because I just think, I wonder if other companies have bought every rig on the market and have got them in their lab. I'm pretty sure plenty of other companies have bought our rig before without us knowing. But we've never done that. We don't have any other companies' rigs in our development lab. We've never looked at anyone else's, because actually we don't want to be swayed by anyone else, and we don't want to let their design decisions affect us and our design.
Do you think there's any benefits though to looking at your competitors?
I think if you want to skew your vision, that's all it does. Is I don't want my vision and my design to be all of a sudden merged with someone else's vision, design, and thinking, because it really has nothing to do with me. I mean, obviously with sim racing, there's a certain set of things we have to follow. It's not just art where you can create whatever piece of art you want. Like we've got to have a wheel in a certain position and a set of pedals, and it's got to have screens. So there's these certain parameters that no matter what you do, they're going to follow a similar setup to other companies. But yeah, if anything, I would avoid looking at anyone else as much as possible. In fact, the only reason I tend to follow other companies from our feed is just to make sure they're not launching copies of us, and so we can kind of address that. And I try and avoid.
It's almost like you're looking back over your shoulder at the competition rather than looking kind of
always
forward at what,
and this
at
is
what they're doing.
And this is something I learned a long time ago. I learned this in the early days of my web design. So I launched a website. It was version 6, I remember, and it won a lot of awards, and everyone was copying it everywhere. Like there was so many copies of this website that, at first it was like, okay, that's not great. What can I do? I was a small company. I couldn't afford to sort of take these companies to court. It's like, and it's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to spend my life in litigation. That's not. I wanted to spend my life designing and creating. So I moved straight on to the next design. I built a new version of the website, and actually I decided to sell the source code to that site. And this was in a time when you couldn't buy source code to anything. You couldn't buy the template. Websites didn't exist. Web designers, what you built was like, it was a closed thing. You couldn't see the code. You can't see inside a Flash website. Like you can just look at HTML code. And you couldn't buy these things. And nobody in the world had sold the secret before until I did. So I was the first person to essentially put the source code to my site online. I put it up for like $99, and everyone just went crazy. It was like there was two camps. One was, what are you doing? You're giving away our secrets. You can't do this. Like this is these are our secrets. Like we've worked hard to learn all this stuff. And the other camp was like, this was amazing. You've helped me to get into this industry, to become a web designer. And I'd have 50 to 100 emails a week, people sort of thanking me. This is great what you're doing. Because ultimately it was a way of educating people on, how you build professional websites.
And I suppose the other thing is that particular website and that particular source code isn't your USP. Your USP is your creativity that leads to being able to come up with unique ideas. So whilst other people are downloading the source code and making their own version of it, you're onto the next innovative project that they can't replicate.
Exactly. So I was always thinking I'd rather put my energy into the next design, and we'd always be ahead of the game. So yeah, in terms of looking at what the competition is doing, really we always want to just be looking behind. We're not really looking at them and trying to replicate what they're doing. And also, if you look at if all you do is look at what everyone else is doing, you end up with a whole bunch of rigs in the market that all look the same, and that's basically what's happened lately. All the markets of whether or not there's benefits or not to aluminium profile, which there are lots of benefits to it, absolutely no doubt about that. That's not what our customer is looking for. That's not, if we were looking to build a rig that, specifically wanted to tick the boxes that someone who an aluminium profile rig works for, then we could build that, and we'd have a product in that market. But firstly, our customers are not looking for that type of product, which is great, because I don't want to design that kind of product. And if we did, we try.
I was going to say it's similar to that quote. I can't remember who said it, but somebody once. Oh, it was Haruki Murakami, Japanese author, said if you only read what everybody else reads, you only think what everybody else thinks, and that's that's kind of what you're saying here about if you only look at all the other rigs, then you'll end up with exactly like an amalgamation of all these rigs, like the mean of all the other rigs on the market. And the other interesting thing about aluminium profile, especially, is there's kind of like a direct correlation between the rigs now and your source code story before. Because if you think about it, aluminium profile is almost like the open source of rigs, because it's so universal, and it's so, you're just buying these lengths of aluminium profile, and then there's all these universal adapters, and it's open source in the sense that you can go on Etsy and people can build, like handbrake mounts or mounts for your iPad or for your phone, and it's like the ultimate open source.
Yeah, and exactly, and at the time there was a fear that, websites where you could just buy templates or this kind of open source nature would sort of kill the web design company, and it didn't, because ultimately there's always someone who needs something that you can't just do with an open source WordPress type arrangement or whatever it is. There's always the demand and need for something that's completely custom and completely bespoke, especially in the higher echelons of design and creation. And that's where Vesaro definitely sits. You just can't do what we do for our clients by taking a sort of an open source architecture of aluminium profile and piecing something together. That's not what our clients are looking for. And you can't do it with that. You could do something, but it wouldn't be what the type of client that Vesaro mainly services need.
Yeah. So what was your first product? Tell us about the first product that you ever designed for Vesaro.
It was the Vesaro I-frame. It's the frame that still now is our core frame, and it's changed a lot since then, but the shape is the same. I guess when I designed that frame, I somehow in that first month of the beginning of that, I managed to really nail the design and to create the shape that gets the wheel where you need it without sort of blocking your entry. And at the time the rigs were all sort of, they had pillars between your legs, things like the Vision Racer was probably the most popular rig at the time, and it came between your legs with a pillar. So that was one of the biggest challenges of, how do you move away from that type of design? If you're going to look at, well, how do these products currently look? We've got to do it in a different way. And we kind of really nailed it. And that's that kind of classic Vesaro look that you see today. And that was the first product that we designed, was just the bare frame. And then we, sort of, it was all just about add-ons and modules, and they kind of grew from there and grew into the crazy sort of collection of products that you see today on our website.
And so two parts to this question. Who was your first customer, and who had you intended your first customer to be? Who were you building it for in the first place?
Our market then was the sim racing industry. It was enthusiasts, home customers. It was very much a market that we're not really in so much these days. Some of our customers are, but that's not really our market. We can talk about that a bit more, and I guess V-Rig is where that will kind of come in a bit more. But yeah, that was definitely our market, and we were sort of fully entrenched there, and that's who we were building for. It was building something affordable but premium, and and something modular, something that really worked for people who already had their own equipment and steering wheels, or maybe they already had a play seat and they wanted to upgrade to a sort of the next level up. So yeah, that was definitely our kind of market.
And then can you remember your first customer? Can you remember where they came from?
Yeah, he's still our customer. He's still using the rig. He's quite active on forums, and he's still using the rig, which is quite a testament, really, because our frame, we always gave a 10-year warranty with the frame, and he's still using it 10 years later. But he's got a quite unique rig that nobody else has got. We built 2 prototypes, and they were really expensive, about 5 times the price of the actual product that we sold. And we launched the website, and we had 2 sales come in through the website, and we didn't even have production running. We had these two prototypes, and for me, like, I wanted the very first customer and the very second customer and third customer to get their product on time.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that was they were getting these very special prototypes, and he's actually got a completely polished stainless steel rig that cost a fortune, that was then painted because he selected the paint color, and it's like super light. It's like a really lightweight version of our rig. It's the only one that exists, and we shipped him that. A massive loss at the time, because the prototype costs a fortune compared to the actual sale price. And it's like a gunmetal grey finish he had. So there's like one gunmetal grey rig out there that he's still using 11 years later. And I think he even had some upgrades to it a little while ago, which was always part of the philosophy as well, was for as much as possible and as long as possible, we would allow people to upgrade their products. Maybe not the most ruthless business approach, because if you look at products today, they try and get you to buy a new product every year, and even build in, what's the big Apple saga of them trying to, reduce the power and speed of it. Because they want you to just buy more product and throw it away. Now, really, when I talked about wanting my product to one day rust in a in a dump, really that's that one product, because it's lasted a lifetime, and even when that person's finished with it, it will still be strong enough to go on to the next person, and really will one day be rusting in some post-apocalyptic future. but there won't be thousands and thousands of them, because you've not had to buy a new one every year. You haven't bought 10 Vesaros in your lifetime. You've bought one, and it will work for as long as possible.
How do you get around then building bespoke, unique rigs for your clients, but then also having an add-on ecosystem that would work? So if you have 10 clients and they all have very slightly different rigs, but then they all decide that they want to buy the handbrake add-on or whatever it happens to be, how do you make sure that works? You must have to have like a kind of core DNA that stays the same for each rig, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the base rig is core, and it has a set fixings essentially on the frame, that we would always just follow those fixings when we design an add-on, so it can always be backwards compatible. And even if something, if there was something maybe from 10 years ago that it just wouldn't quite work, we can just do a custom plate for that customer to make it work, create a custom interface between the two. But generally everything just works backwards, because we kind of got it right 10 years ago. And even when we've improved the frame, so actually the last sort of year we've made the tubing much thicker, just to make it a lot more rigid, but the fixings are still all in the same place. So
was that to react to direct drive wheels, stronger direct drive wheels coming out and heavier direct drive wheels? Yeah,
definitely. And also when when we designed the rig in the first place, the Logitech G27 was the king. It was
That's a crazy thought.
Yeah, it was amazing, and the rig was actually designed to fit that perfectly. So actually, if you took our base rig with our original plates and put a Logitech G27 on it with the little shifter, it all fits really perfectly. But back then, the demands were pretty low, and
it would look very out of place now, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And now you've got direct drive, plus also with our sort of pro setups, we've got like our control manager system on the side and shifters mounted, so you've got a lot of extra weight up the top there. So it's in response to, to building that, because it's a bit like a car company. You build a really good chassis, and that chassis can kind of follow you through lots of different car designs, and our chassis really has been that. And like I said, we've made it a lot stronger over the last couple of years.
So as well as having to adapt to like the success of sim racing, in the sense that there's been these huge improvements, companies have invested in these huge improvements in racing, so direct drive wheels, heavier wheels. It sounds like you've also had to react to the customer base that you've attracted, and it feels very much like you've almost pivoted in a sense, because your market today sounds very different to the market that you were aiming to serve when you first set the company up. So how did that happen? Was it over a long period of getting these inquiries in and realizing there was a market, or was there one contract where you were like, okay, I can see now that there is an underserved market here that we fit perfectly into?
Yeah, it was actually the first year. Do you remember this Sim Raceway? The game?
I don't know.
No, Sim Raceway was a really good game, and you could buy lots of content, lots of cars, and I think you paid per car, and they had a racetrack as well. They did the race experience, and they had the game, and I think it was based on R Factor engine, if I remember rightly. And it was year one of Vesaro, and we were, I started the company with £5,000 basically. We, proper, we didn't have investors or bank loans or anything. It was, literally built from nothing. And, year one was a struggle. Every sale we made, we took a little bit of profit, and we bought a tool, and the next sale we bought a welding plant, and the next sale we paid the bills. And
Tom, this conversation so far has been very interesting. I mean, I remember the days when I used to program in Flash, and I was trying to make Flash games, and gprime.net was a lot of things where it was Flash animation. So it's really cool to hear how he kind of brought that to the internet almost, if you will.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see like a person's methodology like transcend just a single discipline. So in this case, like he was doing web development, programming and design and animation and stuff, and he was on the very, very cutting edge of that. He was doing stuff that literally no one else had done before, and he's kind of carried that approach into the hardware side of things, which we're going to hear more of in the next episode in part 2, in the way that he like designs his products. It starts from scratch, and it's like, right, how do we do this completely without any influence of anybody else? We're going to do something that hasn't been done before. And it's really interesting when you go through his story. Everything he's done has been on a blank piece of paper, and it's it's very inspiring.
That's interesting, and him being a developer like that really kind of, I don't know, in my mind, it solidifies why he does that, because as a developer, a lot of time you are starting from literally zero and you have to make a product. So it's extremely interesting. And the part 2 will be next, but that's going to do it for this episode, part 1 of Sim Sundays, episode 37.1, as we're saying. So I'd like to thank the episode sponsors. Of course, we still have Trak Racer sponsoring us, even though we're not racing. Tom, you get to race on that provided sim rig that they have. So if you're looking to upgrade your sim rig and want to get something other than your disc mounted setup or whatever you have at the moment, go to trakracer.com. And of course, we always have Grid Finder as a primary sponsor, I guess you could call them.
Yeah, kind of.
But if you're looking
we should start paying ourselves, Chris.
I know, right? If you're looking for some sim racing and you want to find that perfect league, go to gridfinder.com to check out that. Or if you're a league owner and you want to use some of our tools and promotion for your league, go to gridfinder.com and add your community to the listing. We appreciate you listening or watching, whatever your choice was for this episode. And on to episode 2 it is. Thanks.
Toodles.